When we see people at work, we often only see one version of them. Maybe it's the leader, the high performer, the manager. We rarely see the full human being behind that role. The grief, the uncertainty, challenges, private battles that they may be silently fighting while still showing up at work every single day. And this matters because workplaces are made of humans, not just titles and outcomes. Gallup research highlights the powerful role leaders and managers play in shaping employee engagement and workplace culture. By the end of this episode, my guest expert will help you understand why psychological safety matters, how empathy changes the way we lead, and why the person who looks like they have it all together may be carrying a story you know nothing about. Because the truth is, we are all more than the role we play. So let's dive into the conversation today. Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. Today, I am joined by Dr. Marline Duroseau, known to many as Dr. Mar. She is a resilience expert, TEDx speaker, author, leadership coach, and women's health advocate whose work sits at the intersection of leadership, personal adversity, and human resilience. Dr. Mar gained national recognition for her TEDx talk, The Secret Battle Behind Powerful Women Leaders, where she explored the hidden struggles many successful women carry behind the scenes. Her own journey has included navigating infertility, pregnancy loss, grief, motherhood, leadership, and rebuilding after profound personal challenges. Today, she helps leaders and organizations develop resilience without burnout while empowering women to embrace vulnerability, navigate disruption, and lead with greater authenticity and purpose. Dr. Mar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Amna. I'm so happy to be here. Such a pleasure to have me here on your show.
Absolutely. And I got to witness your TEDx talk live from the audience because I was a co-speaker at that event and I was really moved by your journey. You know, your career is so diverse. You've gone from leadership development, resilience coaching, you do research, advocacy. Looking back, what experiences and turning points most shaped your journey and led you to the work that you're doing today?
That is a fantastic question. I first want to start off by saying, as many women are, a lot of us are so many, just very multifaceted and are good at a lot of things. So, after graduating from college, I landed, well, my senior year in college, I landed a payroll position with the company that I'm actually still with. Next month, July, will be 24 years since I've been with the company. And that kind of helped shape my actual practical experience when it comes to leadership. But my role in payroll, which eventually led me to becoming the chief financial officer, also helped me build in my financial expertise as well. So, in the midst of building my career, and gaining all of this practical knowledge, I dealt with infertility. So for 15 years, I was juggling, that choice of, do I take a break or figure out how to build my family, or do I stay on this career trajectory to really exemplify everything that I worked hard for in terms of education. And that is kind of what, definitely spearheaded the work that I do now, because after, completing my family and my infertility journey and family building journey is over, I said, I couldn't have gone through all of this for nothing. I know that other women can relate and are dealing with the same thing and finding themselves at a crossroads in their life of what to do. And just my case, it happened to be infertility, but with many women, it can be any type of disruption, grief, you know, domestic violence, divorce, all the things. So that's kind of what spearheaded my work, my quest to want to be able to be there for women, be that relatable shoulder, be that person that they know once they speak to, not only do I understand, I care about your well being and want to help you get to the other side.
So much in what you've just shared. You know, they're my brain, but we don't like to actually acknowledge truly that secret battle that's happening behind the scenes, right? We want to be successful, but we don't want to acknowledge the very human faces of what that looks like, right?
Right. Right. And that's the problem that I think I'm also trying to solve. And many women are jumping on that bandwagon where it comes to just being a little bit more vulnerable. But I know that it takes psychological safety and for women to have a safe place to land in order to show and share their vulnerability. Because oftentimes, whenever we show up online, exactly like what you said, Dr. Amna, we show up polished, we show up ready. Our family, friends, team members, they know they can count on you. But that's because we hide everything inside because we can't struggle. We have this superhero cape that's we put on ourselves and other people put on us as well. But it's important to let everyone know that you can still lead, you can still do all these things, but also live in your truth without feeling shame or judged because you have to acknowledge everything else that you're going through. Because when people think that you're perfect, you think you're perfect, meaning us, we think we're perfect, it doesn't leave space for you to take that break. It doesn't leave space for you to ask for help. It doesn't leave space for people to say, I think I've given her too much, or I think I've asked her for too much. Let me take a step back and figure it out, right? Because you're just always polished, ready to go and get things done. So being able to share that and allow people to know, hey, we are human and we do need help and we do, struggle sometimes. I think it's important to lead with that transparency and vulnerability.
But these are extremely messy conversations. When we start talking about, first of all, not to get too much into it, but
Right.
still get into it, we don't really want to
Yes.
acknowledge these facets of like womanhood or, I mean, you're leading spaces. Like, we don't want to
Yes.
talk about the challenges that are happening. For example, you said, in your very personal
Right.
example, that's of fertility. So take us to a little bit of the parallel situation that was happening. Like, we're seeing you in that polished out environment, you're doing what you need to do, but
Right.
there's all this human mess that's happening in the back end. And the mess will often lead to beauty and, the mess will lead to wherever it needs to go. How is that duality for you while you're showing up in one way while all of this is happening on the inside?
Now, I have to tell you that when I was going through it, I didn't recognize it or identify it as a duality because my headspace at the time was, especially just based on my culture, I'm a first generation American. My parents are Haitian immigrants. When I was going through it, I was tapping into what was ingrained in us, meaning, keep your personal business personal, right? It has to stay private. You as a woman, you have to be smart. You have to be educated. You have to get things done. You have to have that reputation of if you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. And when you show up, you need to be polished. So at the time that I was going through it, I didn't see it as duality or even a multiplicity of the roles that I was occupying at the time. So being on the other side of it, and as I went through it, because in my case, I knew I had to anchor on the fact that if not for anything else, I don't want to show up dumb. I don't want to show up unprepared. What are people going to think of me if I don't get this done? So, what I was doing at the time was hiding and suppressing what I was going through. Okay. Because at that point, that's not what mattered. Because what mattered was getting through that financial presentation, getting through that deadline. Why? Because I also have this career trajectory. I also have this expectation that I'm supposed to show up. So, I didn't put a name or a strategy to it when I was going through it because in my brain, I just needed to get done because I didn't want to be known as, oh no, she didn't do well on that presentation or she wasn't prepared. So now we have incorrect information or, she couldn't handle it. So we're not going to promote her, right? Because look at how she showed up during the presentation. We're going to give it to someone else. So at the time, I think that dealing with that duality, and I know a lot of women can relate to that. And that's why we sometimes suppress how we feel because there's this pressure to make sure you get to the end goal by all means and do it in a way that's not messy. Right. Do it in a way where it can open up other opportunities to you. There wasn't a safe space to really say, hey, I just got that phone call from my fertility doctor. So is it possible that I can postpone the meeting? Am I able to do it virtually versus in person? We didn't have that safe space to do that because the goal was it needed to get done and forget about my personal problem. And that was it.
You know, there are thoughts that I have and specific to this point that you're sharing. Well, I want to first thank you for being being courageous to share this story openly.
Yes.
And secondly, I feel like what happens is we think that we have to go and we have to lead with what's happening in
Right.
our very private lives. And I want to give our audience members the permission that we are not pushing you
Right.
to share what you don't want to share. You don't need to share
Correct.
the hurt while it's
Correct.
happening. But where I really want to draw everyone's attention right now is to give each other the benefit of the doubt and grace
Correct.
and recognize that we are whole humans. And you mentioned workplace, you mentioned that presentation. I do a lot of work surrounding workplace well-being. So
Okay.
when we don't acknowledge our different facets of our being, so if somebody's struggling with a private matter that is definitely going to impact the
Yes.
way they show at work, we don't bifurcate, we don't separate. So can we have more grace and compassion, not just for ourselves but for each other? And then
Absolutely.
you mentioned safety,
Mhm.
can we create those safe spaces where maybe you can ask for an accommodation? Maybe
Right.
you don't have to divulge all the information, but you can feel safe enough to ask for that accommodation.
Exactly. Exactly. And that I think is truly very, very important. And to touch on that a bit and elaborate a bit more, that is one of the themes that emerged in my dissertation research when I interviewed the women participants, the women leaders for my research. And what was that theme? Psychological safety, workplace culture, having a culture of inclusivity, right,
Mm.
for the different things that are going on. And one of the things that a lot of the women really discussed with me was, well, if I go to HR, can I trust that the person in HR, especially if they haven't had my experience, can I trust that they won't use that information against me if my manager comes in and wants maybe a performance evaluation or an attendance review or, something of that nature. So there was a lot of discussion and they shared a lot of experience around trusting HR. So what we found was many of the women too felt like they could trust their immediate leaders more than the overall corporation. And some of the women couldn't even trust or feel safe with their immediate leaders for one reason or another. It wasn't necessarily the leadership, but they weren't in an environment that they felt that if they shared this, it would be there and they would get the help that they need to keep going. So I think it's very, very important to make sure that we do create those safe spaces. And how do we do that? So, me as a leader, I am very empathetic, even outside of my leadership capabilities, just me as a person. I really take on whatever I can sense or someone tells me they're going through. And because of that, I try to always find what is another alternative and because things don't have to be done a certain way. Says who? Why? Right? As long as the work gets done, we can maneuver our way around the path to get there, especially if it means allowing your team member or the person that's in your department to have that little bit of flexibility, have that little bit of grace so that they can get their work done. And what you find is, and what I have found is, once they know that they can trust you and they know that you'll show up for them and they know that, hey, they've helped me in the past, employees and your team, they want to get it done. It's not, oh, okay, great. I was able to get an extension, but I'll just come up with another reason and still be late. No, they'll bust their behind and make sure, okay, Dr. Amna gave me this extension. She didn't even ask me why. I need to make sure I show up and get it done. Why? We now trust Dr. Amna and we trust that the fact that she says she's going to support me, it wasn't just words. She actually showed it. So very, very important for corporations and workplace environments to foster a environment of safety so that employees can have their vulnerabilities and yet still get the business outcomes met.
Love that. There are two things that I want to add to that wonderful reflection, which is culture will always win everything else. Like, so
Yes.
the culture that you create, working on that versus, spending your money in building a yoga room for your employees that they don't want to
Right.
use
Yeah.
and pushing like apps or things and them for like well-being.
Right.
those just absolutely feel hollow. And, those strategies, I feel damage trust way more than you actually working on culture,
Yeah.
building empathy. And these are all things that can be learned. And I
Yeah.
always wish for leaders, even middle management. We know there's number that tells data that tells us from Gallup, like when you support middle managers, there's going to
Right.
be such a retention change for employees downturn.
Mhm.
So those things can be taught. Those things can, this is professional development that can be absolutely done. But I love that you mentioned culture, you mentioned trust, you mentioned loyalty. So double clicking on this a little bit further,
Yeah.
you know, if there are women listening in the audience, these are leaders, these are high performers that are tuning in. Is there a framework or mindset shift that you have found helpful when faced with a similar situation as you had, like, your very personal experience, or in general, when we talk about moving forward and having that momentum while at the same time navigating complexity in our personal lives?
Yes. That is a great question. And yes, and I love that because it basically comes around full circle to the question that you asked previously of dealing with the duality when I was going through what I was going through. I didn't know it at the time. And the beauty of having a lived experience is that ultimately, one would hope that you not only learn from it, but you also grow from it and you use your experience to help other people who may be experiencing or stand to experience a similar situation. And with that, to specifically answer the question, the framework that I've coined is called the EAR framework, and it's EAR, EAR, like our ear. And it is a framework to really help you build your resilience. And the reason why I like the word build is because just like I didn't know that's what I was doing when I was on my journey, once you get to the other side, you can look back and tell other people, hey, you may be going through this disruption. There's going to be ebbs and flows and ups and downs. But if you stick with it, and while you're going through it, you follow this framework. By the time you're on the other side, you probably won't be as impacted or mentally strained because someone was able to help you do the right thing or do certain things, so to speak, as you're going through it. So, this particular ear framework, the E stands for emotional intelligence and emotional awareness, right? And they sound like the same thing, but they're different, right? We have to learn to become emotionally intelligent because once you become emotionally aware and your emotional awareness grows, then you now have emotional intelligence. What does that even mean? Okay. Oftentimes, we want to push through whatever it is that's physically happening in our life. Meaning, I don't have time to be sad. I don't have time to cry. I don't have time to worry about my staff member who is coming in late every day. And I don't take the time to ask why or care. I just know that the deadline isn't met. So, this emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, it can go both ways, meaning internally and externally. So, what I found is we have to learn the skills on how to identify what it is that we're going through emotionally instead of either ignoring it or brushing it under the rug or acting as though it doesn't exist. Because what you don't realize is whatever you're emotionally feeling and going through, that is impacting how you show up. So if you don't have emotional intelligence, you'll show up to that meeting, you'll show up to that presentation, you'll show up to that, you know, patient meeting, and you're just not yourself. Because why? You're sad or you were just crying. And the whole time, instead of focusing on what you're supposed to be doing, you're thinking about what you're doing next or what happened before, instead of saying, you know what? I need to acknowledge the fact that I'm not doing okay right now. And there's something about that awareness, and your body will give you cues. Your body will give you cues. You'll maybe have a sweaty palm. Your, heart rate will start racing. You may all of a sudden see blank. And those physical cues are going to impact how you show up anyway. So if you're just trying to bypass it and not address it, you're setting yourself up for failure. Okay. So having that emotional awareness, which leads to emotional intelligence, is very, very important because only then can you take the next step on what it is that you need to do. Then we have the A, And the A is for adaptability and authenticity. Okay. And I feel that once you're able to adapt to whatever situation that you're in, because what I also love for high achieving women and overachievers to know, we try to fix everything. We try to fix everything. We have a plan. We don't want to deviate from the plan. This is how it's supposed to work. So at that point, once things don't go according to plan, sometimes, believe it or not, we are lost. Like, okay, well, what do you mean? That's not the plan. What am I supposed to do now? So they often feel we now have to scramble for a plan B, and that just gets us frazzled. Where no, if you build in adaptability into your way of life, then yes, you can plan for it, but you won't fall apart if it doesn't go according to plan. And when you don't fall apart when it goes according to plan, you're able to think clearly so that you know what your plan B or what the next step is that you have to take. So once you're able to adapt, you can still show up authentically. Okay, because if you're not adapting, you're not being authentic. Because why? You're frazzled, you can't help anyone, you don't know what to do. You're now putting on a mask because it all plays in within itself, right? So that A is very important because only when you're able to adapt, and adapt doesn't mean you're changing yourself. You are just now saying, okay, I'm not able to, do the presentation today because it rained and no one showed up. Right. So what are you going to do? Be upset all day and sit there and present to an empty room? Now, if that's what needs to happen because now it has to go virtual, you have to be okay with that because at that point you can still produce. But if you're like, no, absolutely not, I'm not going to adapt because I prep for it to be in person, what does that do? It just gets you off of your stability, right? So just being able to adapt to any scenario that comes along because the only person you can control or have control of is yourself. We can't control all of the external factors. And it's important for women to know that. And then finally, R is where you get the resilience. Once you're able to get that emotional intelligence, you acknowledge where you are. You acknowledge now something has changed, so I have to adapt. You build that resilience once you realize, okay, I can still get through it. Yes, it didn't go according to plan, but I got it done. Yes, it didn't happen in the time frame that I envisioned, but it got done. So once you build that first step of resilience, life is going to throw something else at you that you didn't plan for. So what are you going to do? Use that lived experience from the past when you were able to overcome that previous issue to now overcome whatever the next issue is that you have to adapt to. So it just becomes a really nice cycle of building the resilience because you can do it and you will do it. Get over any disruption.
I think my favorite step from this framework was A, and I was smiling from ear to ear because
Yes.
when my plans do not go as planned, I have had to take a deep breath multiple times. And
Yes.
like and that is like where I think for me, perfectionism really shows up in this form of rigidity.
Yes.
And the following anxiety that, ensues. So wonderful framework. Appreciate you
Thank
sharing
you.
that. I know I mentioned perfectionism just a little bit
Yes.
and touched on it earlier too. And as you know, that is a topic of my interest and study. And I double click and as I look at your journey, I want to take a U-turn back to when you were talking about your personal experience, particularly when you were going through infertility. That is such a sensitive topic. I've had loved ones who I've seen go through this struggle firsthand. There are no guaranteed outcomes. And so, as you think about this process and being a woman leader, what did that experience teach you about perfectionism, control, and maybe the limits of our achievement?
Hi, I'm going to start backwards. What did it teach me about the limits of our achievements? I love the way you frame that because there really isn't a limit to our achievements. And if there is one, is because we put a cap on it because we think achievements look a certain way. We think achievements should show up a certain way. We think achievements should happen by a certain time. So, in thinking that and trying to be perfect, we then miss out on realizing and acknowledging and giving ourselves grace for everything else we were able to accomplish. And, backing up from there, having gone through infertility or having to go through it, that's one of the things that I always talk about, Dr. Amna, where at some point you have to surrender. because infertility is one of those things where you are absolutely correct. Not only did you not plan for it, there is no roadmap. You don't want it. You don't want to be in the infertility club, right? So you're fighting it all along. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. So now, once you adapt and say, okay, well, let me ride this wave to see what I can do to reach my goal and achieve my goal of building a family, but you're doing it in a way or for a certain amount of time that you don't know what the journey will look like on the other side. And in order to even stay on that path, you have to be willing to still have hope. You have to be willing to adapt. It all goes back to adapting because on my infertility journey, even when if you take the beginning of my journey, it started, in 2000 for my husband and I in terms of actual treatments. We first started off with intrauterine insemination, IUI. So once I acknowledged and accepted the fact that this is what I had to do, in my brain, "Oh, yeah, this is great. I'm just gonna do that once and we'll be pregnant and that's it." Right? So imagine even if you take infertility out and put any other disruption that you're going through, you think, oh crap, okay, so I got to deal with this, but that's fine. They told me this is what I need to do, it's going to work. And when it doesn't work, okay, well, what do you mean? So now there's more time that you have to think about. How am I explaining this to my job? Now you have to think about more money. Does insurance cover it? Does insurance not cover it? I thought it was only going to be the one. So even along that journey, Dr. Amna, of, disruption, you're still faced with that uncertainty. And the only way to deal with that uncertainty and keep going is you have to have hope. You have to know within yourself, I'm willing to try or at least listen to different options that are out there and adapt to them. Because, and even if it's not infertility, it could be, being a caregiver for an older parent. And, you're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to just move mom or dad in with me and that's it. Whew, okay, problem solved. And then you realize, oh no, it's taking longer for the recovery. Or this isn't going to work because now my schedule changed at work and no one's going to be home with them. So now that means I have to hire a caregiver. So now you're thinking about money. So I say all of that to say, while I was on my infertility journey and all of the detailed nuances that came with that, not knowing what was going to happen at the end of the journey really took a toll. But I had to stay hopeful. I had to keep my faith, and I had to be willing to. It's almost expecting the unexpected. Once my mindset changed to, yes, this is what I planned, but it might not be what happens. So I'm expecting the unexpected. It doesn't hurt any less, it doesn't make you happy, but you say to yourself, okay, this is what I thought was an option that may happen. So how do I keep going and moving forward? Because the other thing too that helped while I was on that journey is finding other things that kept me occupied and busy and happy so that I didn't always dwell on what I didn't have. And that's why I wanted to start with, the limits of our achievements, because sometimes we dwell on what we want and what we don't have yet that you take for granted or not accept or not appreciate all the stuff that you do have. So it's just really about shifting that mindset and looking at things as the glass half empty versus, oh my gosh, glass half full versus looking at it as, oh, it's half empty. What do you mean it's going to fill up? I don't know. No, you have to change that.
Well, thank you for making something that is extremely challenging and hard and
Yeah.
articulating it and sharing it with that, with that courage. And
Yeah.
I say this to say because again, coming to that point where you walk around and you're surrounded by successful people,
Mm.
what is happening in people's personal lives, very personal lives we don't know, and coming back
Yeah.
to grace and compassion. And thank you for sharing that, like being challenged. And one of the things
Yeah.
that has come up over and over again when I've talked to other humans about perfectionism is this
Yeah.
reckoning of like my worthiness and where it is, well, I didn't plan for this. Now I'm handed these cards. How do I deal with that? And like you said, this could show up in many different ways. This could
Yeah.
the definition of family has evolved, whatever
Correct.
people want to choose or whatever is the next thing for them. And then we have like these really prescriptive, rigid ways of looking at things. And we can hold on to hope and optimism, and things can work out or they may
Yeah.
not. And then
Right.
what do, right? So holding
Exactly.
all of that nuance, that complexity, and the next time you go to your workplace and you see somebody who looks perfect and they have it all together, you really
Yes.
don't know.
Right. You really don't know. And that's why I've always prided myself on I'm the compliment queen. I love whatever people wear. I'm a girly girl. So with that, anything that looks good, nice, colored, whatever. And because you just never know. And I truly, genuinely mean it. And that's what I mean by being authentic, right? Always showing up authentically yourself and not letting your situation, you know, have you show up as a shell of yourself because me always giving compliments, let's say, I give that compliment, I just don't know how much that would impact or help someone and brighten their day. So me not doing that, right, because of other stuff that's going on, then I might have just missed an opportunity to have someone else pass it forward or pay it forward and do something nice. So I think that it's very, very important to just always know that when you see people, you have no idea what they're going through. Always extend a little bit of grace. Always be a little patient. Now, I will tell you that I've evolved on the streets because in traffic, when you don't know what people are going through and they cut you off and you want to have road rage, but just adding a little bit of light humor to that. But even in that situation, you don't know what's going on that's causing the person to cut you off. They might not have seen you. They may not. So we don't want to automatically go to worst case scenario or thinking people are being malicious or just like I mentioned in my TEDx talk, if I work with Dr. Amna every day and she always eats lunch with us, but for the past week she finds a reason to be busy or she has to step out or something happened, not necessarily being nosy or trying to pry, but you as a woman knowing you go through your own stuff, you kind of pull Dr. Amna aside, like, is everything okay? Because I noticed XYZ ABC. You don't embarrass her in front of the people. You don't say, hey, you're not eating with us again. Must be nice. You're better. No, 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 no. You take a step back, look at folks, try to examine and see, especially if it stands out to you, so that you never know. Me asking Dr. Amna or Lucy or whoever, hey, is everything okay? You just don't know how much that may have helped her, and that might give her back on track to continue the rest of her day. So I just think it's very important as women leaders to give ourselves grace, to let us know and remind ourselves that we go through things every day, but we are not defined. Our identity and how we're defined is not reflective of the disruption that we're going through. We are more than that. So you can still show up, you can still perform, you can still smile, you can still crack that joke. But once that time comes where you need that time for you, it's okay to take it too. You don't always have to be on 24/7 because we know that we go through things and need to give ourselves a little bit of grace. So that's how I would move forward with that.
That was a wonderful reflection, and
Yeah,
I would say such helpful advice, like really
yeah,
and sharing and leaning in that very personal
yes.
way. This has been absolutely lovely, Dr. Marr. I want my
Thank
audience
you.
to get in touch with you. Are there
Yes.
any take home points that you would like to add to what we have talked about? And then please share how my audience can connect with your work and impact.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. My main takeaway point that I always leave with, because it's a very simple framework as well, but it works and it's easy to remember. It's my MCD principles, which are here on the screen, my initials, Marline C. Duroseau. And the M is to be motivated. Remember, I talked about staying hopeful, right? Be motivated. Why do you get up every day? Why are you doing what you do every day? You have to have something that motivates you. And even if it's nothing in particular, just the fact that you're able to be alive and meet people and have different lived experiences, right? So even though things may not happen according to plan, or even though you may be faced with a disruption, okay, I'm going to stay motivated because this is one of the best ways to be, because I know at the end of it, I'll get what I'm looking for, right? So you stay motivated. That's the and then you have the C, which is to be courageous. And I know we talked about courage earlier in the podcast. And being courageous, I want to make this clear. It doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It doesn't mean that fear doesn't creep in. Being courageous is, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to work out. Is it the right decision? Is it not? Will I do it well? Will I succeed? All the what ifs. And you're afraid, but being courageous is you do it anyway, because if you don't, you'll never know. And what's worse, never doing it and never knowing, or going back and saying, oh, okay, I did that. I realized it was no good. I can now do something else, right? So, because you can't go backwards. So be courageous in whatever it is that you're doing in your life. And also, finally, D is for being dynamic. I love when people show up authentically themselves. So, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you like to give compliments, give them. If you like to dance in the car, dance. If you like to sing, well, you can't dance in the car unless you're dancing on the car, but you know what I mean. So, if you want to sing, you want to be authentically yourself because sometimes life does throw those curveballs at you and it really takes away or wants to strip away your identity and you're more than that, right? You don't want to let disruption take away your happiness and your joy or whatever it is that you're motivated towards. So you want to be dynamic and be yourself. So motivation, courage, and dynamism. And how people can reach me, you can reach me on my website, www.mcdbe.com. Uh-oh. So you see, look at this. Wasn't expecting the earbud to fall out, right? So we're gonna move forward. Yes, it's www.mcdbe.com, and on all platforms, I LinkedIn, Facebook, it's my name, and Instagram is at MCD.
Thank you so much. You are more than the disruption that you're experiencing right now. That's where I will end this. And
Yes.
in the spirit of practicing not as much perfectionism, we're going to leave that blooper that just what happened in the episode. Thank you
Yes.
so much for your time and for sharing your journey with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. The pleasure is all mine. Enjoy your day.
You might believe you don't have the time or energy to focus on yourself, but this is exactly the right time to get serious about your well-being. You don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this video and are ready to take the next step, head over to dramnashabir.com where you'll find free resources you can access right away. The website link is below. Let's get started on your path to thriving.